This part of the program is called A City Reimagined. Peter Behrman and I, who began the September 11th Narrative and Memory Project, edited a book quite recently called After the Fall, New Yorkers Remember September 2001 and the Years That Followed. Our co-editors were Stephen Drury-Smith and Kate Ellis of Public Radio, distilling an archive of 600 stories down to 19 stories. Much to our surprise and delight, we learned a few weeks before the 10th anniversary that Indira Etwaru, executive director of the Jerome Green Performance Space, WNYC, WQXR, had decided to perform stories from the book. These stories were brilliantly adapted by the very talented Arthur Yorkins and played and is still full-scale streaming on their site. Today, we're fortunate enough to share pieces of that 44-minute performance with you in 22 minutes of excerpts. And we're really fortunate to have 3 of the people whose stories are performed with us to respond to the performance, and a family member of one of those people. As this edit was done quickly for this event, you'll appreciate seeing the threads and stitches we used to quilt together this constantly changing quilt of collective memory, and you'll forgive us for being able to see those threads. I want to thank Cara Schaefer for making that work possible in a couple of days. We really see this as a way to honor the people who have come to us today, and after the performance, we will hear from them. Maria Georgina Lopez Zambrano, Robert Snyder, and Elizabeth Potsy-Tanner, who interviewed Maria Georgina Lopez Zambrano, and where's our third person, okay. Zahir Jafari, who was interviewed for our collection, and his story did not make it into the final volume of the book, but his son's story, Salman, his incredible son's story, is represented in the play, and it's a unique honor. He's now living outside the United States. It's a unique honor to have his father here because his voice is also very important. So we'll begin.
We can take house lights to half, and we can mute the podium mic.
If we know anything of memory, it is fallible. If we attempt to store, retain, recall transcendental dimensions the unethical is to be found. In history, truth lies in the perspective of those who have long given up the limitations of academic practice. The scholarly vocation of the dead is with the living, a construction of the past enabling each moment, shaping its future. Human memory functions, fails. A collective context establishing the difference between then and now begins where? Tradition ends. Sites of memory, any significant entity, whether material or non-material, in nature by dint of human will or the work of time, becomes a symbolic element of the heritage of community. Speaks to socio-cultural production, replacing our need for historical truth. These memorials, these remembrances, these monuments, artificial, deliberately fabricated, recreated, tactile, true, exist to help us. We help us in the recall.
At 10 minutes to 9, I was debating about getting up. Do I want to go to work? I would get there late. If not, don't worry about it. I'll call the office.
I was supposed to be at work at 8:30, and just through a total fluke, I woke up at 8:17.
September 11th happened to be my 40th birthday. I got to work about 7:30, which is pretty normal.
I was teaching 5th grade. It was actually the 3rd day of school. It was this beautiful, sunny, blue sky day. And that day, for some reason, the students were really wonderful. I finished reading to them, and then I asked them to take out their independent reading books and read individually.
This is the only time in my life where the alarm clock was right next to my ear, but it was off. It had turned off, and that never happened before. Since I live right here, my commute was literally a 2-minute walk through my courtyard and across the street, so I ran around trying to get ready. I had the Today Show on, which I usually have on in the morning. I was all ready to leave, and usually the last thing I do before I leave is flick off the TV and head out the door. So I was all set to go when the TV suddenly turned to static for an instant and then resumed its normal programming. I heard a sound which sounded like someone slamming one of the doors down the hall.
Here's what's interesting. I would always position myself on the platform for the 1 train in the most forward cab because the stairway at the 1 was right there. So it just saved time. I tried doing it this time, but at 7th Avenue there was a huge line of people on the platform. The train was running late, so I couldn't actually make it to that super spot in the 1st cab. I was in the 2nd or 3rd cab.
I live in Queens, in Elmhurst. My work is in Church Street in Manhattan. I have to take 2 trains, the G train or R train, to lead me to Cortlandt Street, or I have to take the E train until Chambers. But in the morning, I take 1 hour and 10 minutes. Because of my disability, I take longer. So I have to take the train, so by 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd be at my work. I have a vending stand with candies, newspapers, sodas. Also, I have 12 machines, coffee and snacks and sandwiches. Sometimes I have to be strong because I cannot feeling ashamed or feeling bad because I'm making mistakes. I'm making a mistake because of my eyes, not because I want to do it. I have a friend, the name is Julio. He's also blind, but he's a good mechanic. He's helping me with the machines. Oh, September 11, I was leaving home a little bit late.
The morning of 9/11 began very normally for me. My wife and I, we walked the kids over to school, dropped them off at Public School 290 on East 82nd Street, and then we headed back to the Lexington Avenue line. And on the way I said, you know, maybe I should vote later. Maybe I should vote at the end of the day. I'll get to school early. And she goes, no, if you vote at the end of the day, it's going to be too crowded, so let's vote now. So I said, okay, let's vote now. Around 14th Street, the train started running very funny. It stopped between stations. It got really, pokey, so I asked myself, what's going on? Why are we not running right? And I couldn't figure it out. Oh, and there was this very elegantly dressed guy on the train wearing a $2,000 suit with a Rolex watch, and he is fuming. And I'm sort of laughing, watching him get mad, sort of making eye contact with the guy who's across the aisle from me, as if to say, can you believe this guy is in a $2,000 suit and how angry he is that he is being delayed? Eventually, the train picks up again, and it goes further south. But then it goes to Fulton Street, and it doesn't stop, which was odd, because Fulton's a normal stop. Then it goes to Wall Street, and the squawk box on the train says something incomprehensible. So I get out, and I'm sort of disoriented for a minute, and then I walk, I make a left on Broadway, and I start thinking, I know, I'll walk up to the complex, I'll swing down to the path line like always. So I'm walking up then, and I look ahead, and I see a crowd of people standing on the east side of Broadway up across from Liberty Plaza, and I think, okay, this must be it. They must know what's going on.
We were in our place at West Broadway and Murray Street. I was asleep, and my girlfriend happened to be up really early that morning. In my sleep, I heard the jet coming over our building.
I get there because of my positioning. Rather than being the first person up the stairs into the shopping area, I was in this long line on the platform underneath the building. It's progressing nicely for about 15 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, there's a stampede. People running down saying, someone's been shot. Probably because I haven't had my first cup of coffee, or because I couldn't care less. I'm skeptical. So I just stood my ground, and a few of us braved it and said, look, how bad can it be?
I arrived work around 7:15, and I start working in my vending, put all my goods together, my candies. Then I was going to my storeroom to put my table with all the cookies I place in my vending stand, when I heard a big bomb. Like there was a big moment. I don't know how you call it. Everything trembling. It sounded like it was a storm. Nobody know what happened. All my things I have on the table, they fell on the floor, like 20 boxes.
We walked up and into what would be the shopping area, and it's eerie. There's no one there, and there's a very strong, acrid smell. I look left, and there's this guy being carried by two men. He had blood on his foot or something like that, and he seemed a little bit in shock. So that didn't disturb me. I was like, huh? Then this gentleman walked by. I said, what's happened?
My department pager went off, identifying that an airplane had hit.
I looked up and I saw a red and orange fire and debris mixed in with the fire, very high up in the sky. I knew that there was something wrong. I thought that there was a bomb. I'm in the middle of the street. This is the first plane. I'm walking in a crowd, and all of us just look up. Finally, they start running. But imagine people running with nowhere to hide. They're running and nobody's screaming. Imagine that. That's the most frightening thing, at least to me, because that's to show how much of a shock you're in when you're running, not to even know where you're going to run to, and nobody's screaming. So I started to run.
Everybody started screaming. No time to close my storeroom because everybody was screaming. So I come back to my vending stand and I tried to call Julio. I told him, something's wrong. No, I don't know what's going on. People are screaming, but nobody knows what's in there. Everybody says something different, like earthquake or hurricane or a terrorist.
My life changed significantly. First and foremost, I lost my job. I mean, my job went away because the Winter Garden and the annex building were damaged. My job moved to New Jersey, and then they don't have the budget to keep me. Emotionally, I think everyone around us, we were all affected, and we all talked about it for a good 2 months afterward. The Sunday following was the first time it really hit me, and a sense of despair just came over me. But then something else happened, which was even more disturbing, because even beyond the day-to-day sorrow and the death and the trauma, things that affect you, who you are as a person, are become very powerful. So this whole question about who is responsible had a big impact. What does it mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to be a Pakistani Muslim? What does it mean to be an American Muslim? Why are Muslims doing this? Are Muslims doing this? The terrorists were Muslim. I happen to be someone who was very soul-searching to begin with. I also know a lot about our history, and I'm a keen follower of foreign policy in the Middle East, and I've been active, I've written, I've read. So this was a very, very big question for me, and it continued from that day until today. The first couple of weeks, I did not leave my neighborhood. I was afraid. I wasn't afraid to be attacked. I was afraid to face someone who was belligerent, who would not counter, who I could not counter, because it was such a moment of national grief. When people are upset, you can't say things to unupset them. So I kept a very low profile. Plus there were killings in Texas and Phoenix. A Sikh guy got killed in Phoenix. A Pakistani was killed in Houston. A couple of my friends got harassed. For a month and a half afterwards, I shaved every day. I hate shaving, and I do have a pretty thick beard, but I took no chances. I'm even afraid to admit this. No, actually, I'm not afraid. I'm not ashamed. I dressed as a Yankee. I didn't wear my black leather jacket or black jeans or black shoes. I wore short shorts, my vest, my baseball cap, because I just didn't want to stand out. I had been reading very vigorously even before, by the way, so it's weird because I had been reading books about Islam. I was pissed off at us. Muslims have lost a PR battle. We have given in to fundamentalism. We don't look at all the great sort of non-practicing things in our religion. Unfortunately, we've become a religion that people associate with violence, and it's not. I want to be very clear on this. For a long time, me and about 10 million other people were haunted by the images. By the images, they fade when you don't watch them on TV. So then we were haunted by the absence of the buildings, but that too, in time, fades because the absence becomes part of the skyline also. Then you're haunted by feelings, right? Remorse, sadness, whatever. And those fade also with time because you heal. The buildings that are all around, I wonder, are they still coated somewhere by ashes from the building? The buildings that fell, that weren't washed away? And if so, does that mean that there's a piece of someone somewhere around? People have thought this place is a graveyard, and I wonder if the collective dust of 3,000 people went up in the air and dissipated over this entire 16-acre area, and then over into Jersey and into Long Island. Part of me thinks that, in some ways, everything is dusted with people's souls.
Oh yes, I sleep right now much better. But in the beginning, for some reason, I start dreaming that I have no hands. All the time, I'm dreaming that somebody else cutting my hands. I'm dreaming with hands all the time. I'm counting some money and some hands come and take the money from me. Or that somebody come and cut my hands. I have no idea why I'm dreaming with hands. It scares me.
The world is seldom black and white. It is a bunch of shades of gray. But when it's shades of gray and you yourself are impacted by it, then it poses a problem because personal loss is very black and white. What is more significant? Suffering of people here or suffering of people there? I struggle. I struggle with what I think about it intellectually. To me, a loss is a loss. Every person's loss should be equally important because it is equally painful. It's a struggle. I struggle with it.
I went back to the place with a friend of mine just to look them up. And we were standing outside the door that was thrown open, and this man was having a cigarette break. He turns around and he sees me and said, "Come on in." The lady said, "We remember you." And I was worried about them because they had to go through not one firestorm, but two. For all the heroism of the uniformed workers, we cannot forget the ordinary people who were not wearing uniforms, who helped out too. I was saved by women wearing McDonald's uniforms. Those were the uniformed people who saved me.
Peace. Peace upon all pious servants. Peace and grace. I know I am not alone. I face a blank wall of drought and clay, shaped by hands. I weep breast to breast. I cry. I cry first. I cry too. I cry last. With you. Amin. Abana alafi. Fit asamawa. Amin. Abana alafi. Fit asamawat. Amin. Abana alafi. Fit asamawat. Amin.
أبانا الذي في السماوات يتقدس اسمك يأتي ملكوتك وتكن مشيئتك كما في السماء كذلك على الأرض. خبزنا كفافنا عنا اليوم واغفر لنا ذنوبنا كما نغفر نحن أيضا للمذنبين إلينا وادخلنا في تجربة لكن نجنا من الشرير إنك الملك والقوة والمجد إلى الأبد آمين.
Oh, sorry. This is Maria Georgina Zambrano. At the end, this is Elizabeth Posey-Tanner, who was her interviewer and did a lot of interviews for us after September 11th. And before that, had interviewed for the Shoah Foundation for Visual History for many years. So one of our great colleagues. Robert Snyder, who you can read about in your program, but runs an American Studies program at Rutgers, is just one of the great New Yorkers. When I think of New Yorkers, because I don't come from here, I think of Rob. And also a teacher of journalism, of media in general, and just all-around great person. And here, Mr. Zahir Jaffrey, who works for the Port Authority, and so was involved in the day of September 11th, and whose son, Salman, was represented in the performance, and Jerry. So I think, Maria, because you need to leave first today to get back home in time, maybe the two of you can have a chat.
Yeah, let me quickly introduce Maria Georgina. She came to this country originally from Colombia when she was in her mid-20s. She used to be a teacher in Colombia, and then when she came here, like for so many new immigrants, she found work as a housekeeper and nanny, became an American citizen, and about 20 years ago, her eyesight deteriorated even further than it had been before, and so she was trained and now runs a vending stand at the post office right next to the World Trade Center. And that's how I found her and how we continue to have a friendship together. Maria, you just listened to the performance that we both attended. How was that for you to hear your own voice by somebody else?
Well, I start getting excited again. I am sorry, because for me, it was a terrible experience, and to listening to the lady, to review all the things happened that day, is quite made me so sad. It made me cry, and I'm sorry.
No problem. So should have brought Kleenex for all of us. If you would be more comfortable with somebody else starting to talk?
No,
you're
okay? Are you okay now?
Oh, okay, good. Well, we all have these tears and feelings of sadness. My students always ask me, what happens when somebody cries? And I say, why do you ask? Everybody cries. So it's a very sad event.
So how was the performance? How was it to hear your own voice by
that
somebody
is
else?
why I get it. So exciting, the lady so beautiful. Repeat the history again. That happened whenever the lady said that was what happened with me. That experience was terrible, and especially because I can't see. So listening to the people screaming the way the lady said, listening to the people are running, for me was more scary than anybody else. Because I feel lonely, I feel like probably I make problems to another people around me, helpless.
But I remember you were helpless, but you also helped somebody. Do you want to tell that story?
Yes.
What happened?
Was a story. The lady had a little baby, like 2 years old, and the nursery school was in front in World Trade Center. And they have a big truck, and they moving the children between the World Trade Center and another school that they haven't. Another succursal they haven't in Church Street, I don't know where. So this lady can say, Maria, can I have your telephone? I need to speak with my husband because my baby was there. So I say, of course. I give it to her, and she called her husband, and her husband said, yes, our baby is there. So the lady immediately fall into the floor and start screaming and cry. And the only thing I could go and get a big bowl of water and put it on top of her and give it to her, but she was not be able to drink the water, and she was trembling, and she was shaking and screaming and crying. So me and Walio, two ladies, I called my angels, come to my bed and say, Maria, come, terroristas are here. The lady was on the floor, and they hold the lady, and they hold me, and they say, come on, you fold your cane, and we have to run. You cannot stay here. Terrorists are here. They don't let me take my wallet. They don't take me my bag. We leave everything open. My drawers, my vending, all my things, and we go out until the corner. When I found in the corner a police say, it's terrorists here, you cannot run anywhere. And I say, no, let me go inside because I have my things there. They say, no, you cannot go there. You have to run. And you have to run all like to Broadway, not run to West Broadway, not run to Broadway, all for Church Street. And the ladies take one lady for one arm and the other lady for the other arm. I so scared and so trembling because I hear too many ambulances. I hear the fire engineers. I hear people screaming. The telephone doesn't work. And I say, my God, where am I going now? What can I do? I have no money in my hand. I cannot call my husband because no money, no telephone. I was panicking. And we stopped in Canal Street. And I tried to get inside of the post office, and they don't let me talk, and they don't let me call anybody because anyway the telephone doesn't work. We walk one block more, and we stop, and the lady say, well, Maria, we have to go. I had to go to Staten Island, and the other lady, I don't know, she has to go to another place. What we can do with you? By miraculous, a lady come and say, oh my God, you're working in the building. What happened in the building? And say, terrorists. Terrorists are around here, and we had to run. And we don't know what we can do with Maria. And the lady said, where do you live? And I say, I live in Queens. Say, don't worry. I bring you to Queens because I live in Queens. And I hold her hand, she hold my arm, and we walk and walk and walk until we get to 14th Street. In 14th Street, they say we could take the train. No trains. We had to go more and more. And I asked the lady where we are. She said in 14th Street. Don't worry, Maria, I bring you home. And if she asked me where I live, I know I live in Queens, but I forgot. I forgot where I live. I forgot my telephone number. I forgot everything. And I asked her, why too many noises? Why too many cars? And she said, it's fire, engineers, it's ambulance, because too many people die. Well, we go there until 59. And 59, they said we could take the train there. No, no trains. We had to walk all the way the beach until I get home. But in the middle of the bridge, the bus stopped, and the man told the lady to bring me into the bus and drive me like 5 blocks. When I get until the end of the Queens Bridge, I go with her until Roosevelt Avenue. And Roosevelt Avenue say, Maria, where do you live? No, you leave me here and I could go because I forgot where I live. She said, no, I'm going to call my father. And my father asked, where do you live? What is the name of your husband? And we say, and the lady gets connected with the father gets connected with my husband gives it the address, and he brings me home. This is the way I go home, but I suffer so much.
And
took you how long to get back to your vending stand?
How long from my vending stand? We arrived home around 2 o'clock.
No, but you were out of work.
I
after
was
that,
out
right?
of work for 3 years. I started September 11, and I started working 2004 and August 1st to the same vending stand.
And you're back there again and still.
Yes, I start again in the same vending stand. The Boston property is the owner of the building, and they built a beautiful vending stand. You are very welcome there. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, go and visit her. It's right in the lobby of the post office. The post office on Church Street.
What was it like on the 10th anniversary?
And how was it for you on the 10th anniversary?
Oh, in the 10th anniversary, so I was strong enough. And many people ask me, how you feel it? That tomorrow is September 11. I'm okay. I feel better because I'm working now, and I have a good health, and everything is beautiful, and I have too many angels around me, too many people who help me. I'm so happy now. That day I was very fragile, and that day I was very worried because, you know, too many comments, I hear too many people, I hear too many people around the building. Yeah, I feel very cranky that day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria, for telling us again. I'm glad you have your vending stand back, and I'm coming to visit you next week.
My vending stand is beautiful.
Okay. I bet it is. So, Rob, we've done this before, but you're a wordsmith, a historian of journalism and a director of American Studies, and you were caught up in the maelstrom of 9/11 very dramatically. So I wonder what it brings back for you to listen, to watch this performance, or how you respond to the performance.
Personally, it was fascinating to see me performed. I thought I was much more earnest. I sound like more of a wise guy. I guess that's the truth. I also was fascinated to see how the performer picked up my patterns of speech without ever hearing them recorded. He read them, and he told me later that the patterns of speech on the printed page are as revealing of who you are as the fingerprint. And I'd never guessed that before. But what moved me most about the play and watching the play was actually the play for me stopped at the moment when the final catastrophe of that morning was over. And in some sense, it left for us to imagine, think about, consider what the follow-up to that catastrophe might have been. It left it open. It left it there for us to imagine and think about. And for me, it was very much a kind of liberating performance, because then I could reflect on what had happened, what hadn't happened, what I wished had been done differently, what had been done with the story of 9/11 one way or another. And it opened up a sense of possibilities both about the day, the meaning of the day, and its impact on the city that enabled me to think anew in ways that I hadn't anticipated.
So it's almost like a rerun of going back to that time. What do you wish had happened differently?
There's a lot that I wish had happened differently, particularly with wars overseas, and most of all in Iraq. I also think that, and this frustrated me very, very deeply. On 9/11, I really believe I saw New Yorkers at their best. I saw ordinary people at their best. I saw them pulled out of their private shells, and I saw them help total strangers without regard to their creed, their religion, their politics. And that was bound to come to an end. That's the unity of people trapped in a foxhole. But then to see what we did with and for each other, then used to justify things that I never could have justified. To see people speak in my name as a survivor and then advocate things that I never would have advocated myself made me very, very angry. And I think it's one of the reasons that I try to speak about 9/11. I don't speak about it all the time, but I try to get my response to it in, because I really felt that the president and a lot of the families who've been around 9/11 memorial activities have represented a consensus that doesn't include me. And that makes me very, very angry. The second thing that I wish had come out of the day was something that was really hammered home to me when things really began to break. You know, within a few days, I'll never forget, there was a page in the Daily News, and it showed, in journalism, it's called a truck. One page is devoted entirely to a picture, and the facing page on the right is to text. And the picture on the left showed all these iron workers getting ready to go down into the site. And we all believed it was still going to be possible to rescue people, that they would be found deep inside there. And the headline above it said, "A People's Army." And that's exactly how I felt. That ordinary people who had come to the fore on 9/11, and I'd seen it happen again and again and again. Now, the very same guys who had built those buildings, some of whom included some of my best friends' dads, were going to go down there and use their knowledge, use their strength, use their courage to pull people out. And it didn't happen. Everybody inside was dead. And yet, for me, the turns and twists that the city's taken in the decade since 9/11, having kept faith with the ordinary people who proved to be its great strength on the immediate days of the attacks and the aftermath. New York City, in its economic policies, in its housing costs, in its development patterns, is a city ever less friendly to the working class people, cops, firefighters, construction workers, teachers, nurses, medical techs, ambulance drivers, who stepped forward in the greatest moment of crisis. And that, in addition to the first betrayal by the president, still seems to me like a second betrayal of some of the great possibilities of 9/11.
When you came to hear a tiny speech I gave to a tiny group in January 2003 on a very cold day, you said to me, "I need to talk to you because I need for you to understand more than you do." Because I was also very angry and felt very betrayed by the city. And hearing these stories like Talat's and Zora's and others, I felt in myself taking a very hard stand against things. And what I remember about that day, but I think I sat with you for an hour and a half and asked one question. Maybe you say I asked 2 or 3.
Maybe 3, but no more than 3.
I began to understand, you know, what Jeffrey Hartman and Dory Laub and others have written about as testimony, as an act of active listening in order to learn, not just in order to feel, but in order to learn. And what you taught me in that very complex interview was all the ambiguities that you felt as a young man who thought one day maybe I'll be a soldier, and how that came up again in you. And it was so hard for you as an intellectual, leftist, a human being, a person caught up in it and angry about it, to negotiate through those feelings. And I learned so much from that about the importance of holding on to ambiguity while you're feeling the feeling and as you're moving towards thought. And I wonder if you could just talk about that in-between space a little bit.
Yeah. I basically grew up, I was born in 1955 and grew up in the shadow of World War II. And my father would always say, well, marrying your mother was the best thing I ever did, but being in the Army in World War II was the biggest thing I ever did. And I was raised in the shadow of that, you know, and I imagined that I might go into the Army as a young man. I mean, as late as high school, it seemed entirely plausible that I would enlist in some branch of the service. But along came the Vietnam War, and I almost had to unlearn everything I'd learned. That's what I felt. And it didn't stop with me. Both my parents became quite opposed to the war, although not initially and not reflexively by any sense. But they came to oppose it strongly. And so I grew up, and as an adolescent, you know, the formative experience I had was opposing the Vietnam War. And then along comes 9/11, and I think, well, you know, we're going to have to protect ourselves, you know. I'm a little too old to do this myself, but the immediate aftermath of 9/11, I felt like I was back in the world of December 7th, 1941. In a strange way, I felt right at home. I felt right at home. You know, I was thinking, what could I do? What, my wife was thinking, what could she do? And then within a few months, I decided we were living back again in the wind-up to the Tonkin Gulf resolution, where the president's lying away into an unnecessary war. So I got this incredible sense of vertigo, and I'm pulled back and forth. And I have a cousin who's a lifer in the Army, did an extended tour in Iraq, clearly scarred him very, very deeply, much more than the first Gulf War, which he was also in. One of my closest friends, who was in the World Trade Center bombing in '93 and then was on the upper stories and got out just before the first plane hit, in 2001 was killed with the Jersey National Guard in Iraq. So the whole thing was very, very close to me. And yet, in a strange way, even though my own ability to survive on 9/11 made me feel that, you know, my war had come to me, just as it had come to my dad and my uncles in World War II. And finally, I'd known that I did fine. I lived up to the standard that my uncles would have set. But I couldn't take any joy in that for two reasons. The immediate reason was right after 9/11, the biggest thing I had was survivor guilt. Why am I alive and all these other people are dead? What did I do that was so great? All I did was run away. And in running for the rest of my life, I'll be haunted by the face of a woman who fell about 20 yards ahead of me as I was running. And she spun around on her back, and what would she have seen? 200 people racing towards her, and the entire debris of the South Tower coming up behind us. And she screamed, a horrible scream, her mouth was wide open. And for a fraction of a second, I thought, I know how to lift up heavy things. I used to be a garbage man. Maybe I should just try to hook my arm under her and pull her to her feet. But then I thought, you know, I've just run around at least 3 tangled knots of people who've fallen all over each other. I don't want to get caught in one of those, because if I slow down for a second, I'll get hit. So I swerved past her and I kept running. And for weeks afterwards, I can't tell you, I beat myself up over the fact that I didn't stop, even though that's probably what got me out of the full flow of debris. So my survivor's guilt didn't help me. And then watching what was done in the name of 9/11 and watching one of my best friends die in an unnecessary war just seemed like such a waste. And I'm left hanging with this odd sense of duality. I lived up to the standard that I'd always wondered about. But it doesn't make me feel any better. It doesn't bring my dead friend back. It doesn't reverse 10 years of totally crazy national policies. Doesn't erase, misdirection of our country in the most profound ways. So I never expected my own story to cancel out so much that was wrong. But the tension between the way I felt about what I lived through and the best of what I saw living through 9/11 and the misuse of it since then, gnaws at me and angers me very, very deeply.
The last question that Arthur Yorkins asked of you in the panel the day of the performance was, what do you wish for the city of New York?
That's an easy one to answer. I wish for affordable housing so cops, construction workers, firefighters, teachers, and ambulance drivers can continue to live here and make it the great city that it is.
Thank you. Okay.
Zahir, before you tell us your reactions to the performance, you were there that day, and I had the privilege of interviewing both Zahir and his son Salman, whose eloquent testimony you just heard, who asked all those disturbing questions about loss, and a loss here and a loss there, and so on and so forth. There were so many of them. But before you tell us your reactions to the performance, tell us a little bit of your own experience that day.
I'm going to try and make it very brief because I've said it so many times, and I really feel that I really shouldn't be on this panel. Compared to the terrible things that have happened, especially after hearing Mrs. Hamdani's story. I happen to be working on the 65th floor, which is relatively low point, geographically speaking, on the North Tower. And I would say that I just put my head down and kept walking. The instinct for self-preservation was strong. The only thing is I was probably among the very, very last people to get out of the building because I have a polio-affected leg, and I was having some problems in my back, and I'd seen my orthopedic surgeon a few days ago, and he was waiting for the results to come out. I was wearing new shoes, and new shoes are always a problem for me because one shoe has to be, my left shoe has to fit tightly, and therefore it hurts, and the right foot is loose, and it rubs against it. So I was in somewhat, the first 3-4 months are very uncomfortable. I was wearing new shoes. Combined with my physical disability, I was going very slow, but I just wanted to make sure that I get out. I know that when I reached the concourse, there were just very, very few people around. And the last of the volunteers and the policemen were saying, get out of the building, get out of the building. The building is about to fall. I'm skipping most of the intermediate part because you've heard it a few times. Well, I'll come back to it, but I think when I got out, I just took one look at the building, and that was the only look that I had at the building, and I said, this building is not going to survive. I was probably 150 yards away from it when it collapsed. Now, here is the thing that touches both sort of that trajectory that connects my narrative with my son's, is that day, we were supposed to have lunch together. Salman was working in the financial tower. I was working in the World Trade Center. And we used to have lunch maybe twice a week sometimes. We were very, very close to each other. And that day was one of the days that we were supposed to get together. And this part I'm mentioning because it wasn't in the play there. When Salman's train pulled in, he was expecting, of course, he didn't go up. He went out into the courtyard. And he said, all right, I'm going to wait for my father. And when his father didn't come out, as I told you, I was among the very, very, very last people, perhaps I don't know whether I was the last or among the last 3-4 that came out. He saw everybody leave, and he didn't see me, and then the building collapsed. So he called a cousin of his who was living in Manhattan those days, but they're both out of the country now. And they both offered the prayer of the dead for me. And then he called my middle son, who was living in New Jersey. I think the telephone connections were, I think the landline connection was still good, although the cell phones were off. And he said, Mustafa, why don't you go home? Because I can't leave Manhattan, and you and Baba is dead. So I think you're the man of the house. Go and be with Mom. The performance, let me come back to the performance for a minute. It was excellent. I mean, it's you obviously, I don't know whether these were professional actors or very talented amateurs. I can imagine Salman talking like that. He is much more eloquent than I am. There's no doubt about that. I am not sure that I have never felt any, and I feel guilty about that. I have never had any nightmares.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
And I think I didn't have any nightmares because that part of the brain which creates those nightmares is I think, hypothalamus gland, which is programmed to let you fight or flee. And I was totally concentrated on fleeing. So there was no conflict. I fled. I fled. So I fled successfully. And there was, on the other hand, Salman had a lot of conflict because there was nothing he could do. He saw bodies come down, which is, I can't imagine how he would. I'm basically not a very, very tough-hearted person, so I'm glad that I wasn't there. But to see all that and not know whether his dad was alive or not, I think he had nightmares for a very long time. And I can understand. But I am sort of ashamed to admit that I have yet to have nightmares, although a couple of friends of ours, a good many Pakistanis seem to go into the medical profession, and many of them are psychiatrists. I said, don't worry, you will have them.
You'll get them eventually.
Okay, I haven't had them yet.
You know, Mary Marshall mentioned we're always being educated as oral historians by the people we interview. And I think of you as somebody who really educated me a lot, because we always start at the beginning. I say, tell me where and when you were born, a little bit about your family. And your answer to me was, well, I think I'll have to start 600 years ago. And we did move through several geographies and centuries in the first part of our interview. But you talked a lot about your father, who was, I think you said, at first a socialist and an admirer of Nehru and a secular, and who became, after partition, somewhat religious.
Yes.
And you talked about your own relationship, as does Salman in his interview and in this testimony to Islam. And I wonder if you could say something about that evolving relationship and also about the perceptions of Islam post 9/11.
Yes, certainly. And I see a little bit of some kind of a parallel stream going on. People say that girls become their mothers and boys often become their fathers. I know I very recently I had gone to England to see my two sisters. I'm the youngest of three, and I thought I needed some TLC. And older sisters, I mean, in their eyes, I can do no wrong, absolutely, and I'm the perfect gentleman there is. But I also met an old friend of my father's, who was a banker, and when he came into the room and saw me, he gave a start. And he said, my God, for a second I thought it was your father. Because, of course, he knew my father from like around 1950. And until so, yes, I am becoming a little bit of my father. And when my father, before partition, he was almost a socialist, but very westernized. So he was a socialist, but he did not wear the Hindu dhoti and the cap, but he wore a felt hat, and he said, I used to dance at Charleston. But he did he came under the influence of a capitalist who was also very religious and a good man. But towards the end of his life, he was becoming extremely disillusioned with the practice of Islam as it was being done in a lot of places, particularly the Middle East. There was a time when, we would sort of take pride in our heritage and say, we are descendants of such and such and such and such. And after a certain time, it seemed to me that my father, it's very funny, people grow old and they become religious. My father grew old and he became non-religious, and the same thing is happening to me. I used to say Islam is a wonderful religion and Muslims are terrible people. I hold not that drastic a view, but I do feel that religions, and all religions, they've lost their place. There was a time when they were needed. We no longer need them. Human being invented God in his own image, a human being, or the human beings invented God in their own image. I don't think that works any longer. I gave up being a Muslim after I performed the Hajj, which every Muslim should do once in his lifetime. And one of the rituals in the Hajj are that you have to, after you throw ritual pebbles at Satan, you have to go around a certain place several times. And the crush is sometimes so much that if you lose your footing, you can be crushed to death. When my father performed the Hajj, he came back and he said, you know, there was a group of big Sudanese who were linked arm in arm, and they didn't care who came in their way. I'm paraphrasing him. He said, I fell, and somebody grabbed me, and if somebody had not grabbed me, I would have been trampled to death. Believe it or not, virtually the same thing happened to me. I was going around that, but I have a bad leg, and my father was very athletic. He was as I told you, I think he was a boxing champion in school days. But I stumbled, and I was performing Hajj with my sister-in-law and her husband, and they had their backs to the pillars, and she was close to me. She was not more than 6 feet away, but she lunged out and held my hand. But if she had not, I would definitely have stumbled and come to my death. I started thinking. I am an engineer, and correlation and figures and associations come easy to me. And I said, my goodness, 3 million people every year, they spend about 12 days there. So how many man hours is it? How many millions of dollars? With this kind of money, and God knows how many lambs and camels and cows are slaughtered, I cannot imagine why we still carry on this barbaric Abrahamic rite. I mean, I can't imagine that, but we do. And we could probably build a few universities, several hospitals, maybe even a nuclear power plant every year for that. I'm mentioning nuclear power plant with a tongue in cheek, of course. But to spend all this money to go around a black stone is, I think, its time has passed. I will say one more thing because it's very interesting and touches about religion. One of the major religions in the Indian subcontinent is Sikhism. Sikhs. And the founder of the religion, Guru Nanak, he founded in, I think, the 16th century. And he wanted to amalgamate Hinduism and Islam, an idea which the great Mughal king, Akbar, propagated, never could succeed. He was too enlightened, too far ahead of his own times. But Guru Nanak tried, and one day he was having a discussion with a Muslim cleric. I don't know the story is apocryphal or is it true or whatnot, but Guru Nanak was reclining, and I'm not a Sikh, of course, but I'm still nominally a Muslim, but more as a brand. And his feet were pointing in a certain direction. So the Muslim cleric says, Guru Nanak Sahib, please don't point your feet in that direction because that's Kaaba, that's the place of God. And Guru Nanak immediately sat up and said, Maulvi Sahib, Maulvi is a word for a Muslim cleric, please give me the direction in which God does not exist so that I can spread my feet in that direction. Okay.
Just before we came up here, you were telling me, or we were talking about how the country has changed and your own experience here. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I could talk all day and all night about that. I came to this country in the 60s, late 60s. Country was obviously in a great flux. It was a great time to be a student. When I came here, my greatest regret was for having come as a grad student. I wish I had come as an undergrad.
Grad students have to work.
No, I could not imagine a place of learning so glorified. When I had my father was a well-to-do man. He could have afforded to send me to any university, anytime. And he was advised. I was the only son. He was very close to me. We were very attached. He was very fond of me. And the advice that were given to him were, Jafri Sahib, don't send him to United States. He's too young. He's going to become spoiled. Spoiled is a great word. What it means is that he may take up with a God forbid, a white woman and come to grief socially and bring shame to his family. So as an undergrad, I was very young too, that's true. But whatever my father said was law unto me, it's fine. So I did my engineering, and in those days, to do in engineering, I'm not overly praising myself, although I am slightly, but it was very hard to get into an engineering school in Pakistan. I think in today's New York Times, there was an article about the IITs and the Indian students. We can't touch a candle to them, of course. But when I graduated from my school, I was lucky enough to be accepted by MIT and Stanford, Cornell, and I had no idea where to go. My father had taken no interest in my postgraduate schooling. When he used to see me studying, putting 4 or 5 hours after school, he would say, "My God, he's used the word makora, which was an insect. He said, you guys are like insects. What are you going to do? Life is more than these slide rules and drafting boards." But when I came to this country, Vietnam War was a big thing. Women's liberation was a big thing. I know that I took part in a candlelit this thing for Martin Luther King, and I sang "We Shall Overcome." The country was generally more conservative than it is now, and yet I think it was more decent. There was not that rabid warmongering that I see now. And by the way, you mentioned about that Gulf of Tonkin, the spurious sinking of the ship. I think the United States has a history of sinking their own ships. Am I right? I mean,
Cuba.
Yeah, Cuba, exactly. Yeah. So we have this. What I can't understand, we have this huge body of liberal intellectuals and kind-hearted people, literally. I mean, you people are very kind-hearted. Why is there not some kind of a flow towards the heart of the United States? I mean, why are we, when I grew up on comic books. I mean, I learned English before I learned Urdu, although I became a precocious reader in both very early. But when I came to this country, I really felt that US government was governed by these values of uprightness and valor and independence. And it's still held to a great extent. But it seems to me that there's an obsession with having an enemy all the time. In other words, there's a good guy, bad guy obsession. It's almost like this country needs to be given a psychiatric treatment, the entire country. It's as if it must have an enemy. When we run out of enemies, we create them, and I think we are going to go into Iran very soon, which would be a terrible tragedy. I hope it doesn't happen.
I think we will stop. We will stop there. Well, maybe one last final question: is the world that you imagine or you would like to see for your children and grandchildren?
I feel extremely concerned about my children, like many other people's children. I think I saw the best of this country, and I don't think I will ever see that. If you may not recall, but in the mid-60s, this country was so prosperous and so rich that never had any country in the history of civilization been as rich, even relatively speaking, not even Rome. In fact, there was a French, what is his name? It'll come to me. The American, he wrote a book called The American Challenge. Servan Schreiber, I think his name was. And that book was a call to arms to Europe and said, for God's sake, wake up, because if we don't wake up and catch up with the United States. We are all going to become vassal states. Look what we have done to this country. I mean, we have pauperized this country. From the greatest creditor nation in the history of mankind, we have become the greatest debtor nation in the history of mankind. What a shame. I feel very concerned about the future of my children and your children and your children.
Mr. Jaffrey, you should know that your son's voice, I'm remembering when you said black and white and enemies, your son's voice is the voice of a diplomat who watched, one of our students analyzed his interview recently and talked about the contradictions he had witnessed in all the generations and how he looked on both sides constantly. And one of the most eloquent things he said, repeated here tonight, was, it's shades of gray. It's not black and white. And he's really helped our students understand something that you've been saying also in a different way. So I want to thank your whole family for being here and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
And I'd like to close. I think we're at a closing point. No questions? Anybody from the audience would like to speak or comment? We have a little more time. Marianne says. 15 minutes. Oh, okay. So we have 15 more minutes. Would anyone like to ask questions or make commentary on both the performance and the responses? Yes.
Because, you know, they were making her accent stronger and so on. This, of course, is a performance of a very different kind, but I'm wondering if you might want to reflect on that alienation of inhabiting someone else's voice and the different kinds of ways that can be done and ways in which you feel about it. I mean, we have the ranges between the kind of thing that she described and then an Anna Devere Smith who inhabits herself so many different voices and is able to give voice to witnesses and embody their story. So there's obviously a huge range of different ways that can be done, and I wonder if you could reflect on that.
Just to say, as a preface to that when I talked to Indira Etwaru after I learned this was happening, she made the situation so that the names of the people who were performed were not included in the program, which I thought was very correct. Anyway.
No, you take it.
Okay. It's tricky for me to address on one hand because I felt so well performed. I learned about myself. It was really interesting. You know, it was like reading students' evaluations sometimes. You know, when you're a teacher, you'll learn things about yourself that you haven't noticed. At the same time, I know that in discussions around oral history at Rutgers, where I teach, I'm constantly arguing that what we need to preserve is the voice of the narrator, that the narrator is paramount, that you can't do just whatever you want with somebody's interview, that it really must retain some authenticity in terms of the context, in terms of the intended meaning, in terms of the intended usage. That, in this sense, I think oral history culture, which I encountered 30 plus years ago now, has a lot in common, it seems to me, with documentary culture and its attempt to be faithful to the words of the narrator, because the narrator is the most important thing going on. Digital mashup culture, where you can put anything together from all points of the compass, doesn't fit very well. And when I talk to my 18-year-old son about this, he's absolutely baffled at how I could feel this way. But I do, and I know that's something that I picked up in oral history, and I would still stick with fairly strongly.
You know, I was trying desperately not to make eye contact because it's like you're in a classroom and the teacher is about to ask something. You want to be sure that the teacher doesn't look at you. So as far as the performances go, I think I will just talk in context of my son and the person who I would say the only difference is Salman is more mellow. I mean, the person who acted for Salman's part was a little bit more like me than Salman. Salman is my.
I think that's true.
I may give you a little bit of history of his. When he was when he was going to high school, he was going to what is supposed to be the most rigorously academically top-notch school in Pakistan, which is Karachi Grammar School, which has the record of sending the largest contingent of students in a single year to MIT, incidentally. Yes, no, so but we had, when he came to this country, he finished his, he came here and I put him in high school. I was in Poughkeepsie in those days. I couldn't afford to put him in a private school, so he went to this. And he came back and said, Baba, they hardly teach anything. I think I'm going to go back to Pakistan. He was living with my parents, which I thought was a great training ground for him. My father was a better father to him than I would have been. But when he started college here, Marshall, you'll be surprised, he was very young. In fact, he was so young that he could not be accepted at a very good university after he graduated. And they wrote him a letter. It said, the average age of our applicants is 26, and you're just 20. So get a few years practice and come back and apply to us. This was the School of Diplomacy at Princeton, some school of, in any case. And of course, when he started working, he started earning money, and he became a different person. He was no longer the professor kind. But while he was going to school, he twice won a paid internship for summer, where he would be a student counselor at Vassar. Mm-hmm. And he was counseling people who were 4, 5, 6 years older than him, constantly. So I mean, that's the kind of person he is. Yes. He is, if you have a group of so many people and some kind of a group discussion goes on, and you have 4 or 5 different groups who are all having a different voice, he would probably be the ideal moderator. Mm-hmm. He's the guy. And I wish that he had not done his MBA. I wish he had done his doctorate in political science, which he wanted to do. But I guess it's too late now. Now he has to put bread on his table.
Never too late. Yes. Did you have a question? Okay.
I had a sort of related question. For me, the performance in this case was quite well done, and I certainly take your word for it that you thought it was very, very flattering in terms of your own voice. But what I found disturbing in this particular was the music, which I found very manipulative. The music, the sound. I found that was really an effort on the part of the filmmakers or the makers to stir emotion. Why does one have to do that when one has oral histories that are already loaded with emotion? So there was something really heavy-handed about the way that was put out. So I wonder if you would think that or not.
Anybody want to speak to that?
I thought the music was beautiful. I mean, it's interesting. I thought the music was beautiful. For me, it evoked passage of time, flights of memory. It got me. I wasn't performing myself, but it was interesting in watching that clip, right? And listening to those sounds again. It got me in a much more expansive, meditative mood than I would have been otherwise. It's going to sound morbid, but in some of the sounds that he coaxed out of his instruments of flight, I did start to think about, the migration of souls and what it would have been like if people had gone up in ashes. I always said to my wife, and she thought I was dead on 9/11. It took her 6 months to tell me that. between the fall of the South Tower and when I finally got to call her on the phone, she said, for 50 minutes, I thought you were dead. I didn't see how you could have gotten out alive. And I always said to her that, if I did die, let's think that, I came to rest somewhere east of Montauk Point. It's a beautiful point. I love the Atlantic Ocean. Wouldn't it be nice? And the sound of falling that was evoked by the music I thought was spectacular. At times, I thought the narration did a great job. At times, I wasn't sure the narration was doing a great job. But the music, funny, for me, was tremendous, for me.
Can I add a bit to it? I have exactly the same feeling. The music was amazingly good. I mean, it was. I'm not a kind of person who's sort of was lachrymose, but I felt like weeping. I mean, honestly, it was. So you may be the oddball there. Pardon me.
Yes.
I just had a quick comment that I think also in the video, we were hearing it as background music, and you probably heard it live, not as background music, which probably was a different experience. Am I right in that?
I can't quite hear you.
That in what we heard here was the music kind of as background to the narration, kind of happening at once, and live it was probably more of a concert and a separate thing.
It bled into the different sections. I mean, my response was that the poet, Carl Rux, who's obviously very talented, we had to cut a lot of him out for this particular. And that was the element that, the talking for people that I like poetry to come from the lips of those who we take their stories from. I think what they say is poetry. I think Salman's statement about the dust settling and 3,000 souls is as much poetry as you can find. And so I go for those beautiful plain passages. I came to love the cellist because he came from the Museum of Chinese in the Americas, where I worked for many years through the Columbia to build partnerships. So I kind of fell in love with him because of who he was. So the music didn't bother me.
But I thought it was just interesting that we were hearing it like twice removed. So there was the story, the live performance of the story, and then we were watching the edited video of the performance. So
yeah, it was maybe different there.
So I think there probably was a real difference.
It was I think it may have felt less intrusive there, and it also, I remember just finding out this was happening and being so terribly nervous about seeing it because I knew it would bring back all the emotion, and I wanted it to be good also. And the music calmed me and enabled me to move into that emotional space without feeling a jolt. So actually it worked for me. We have time for one more question and then we should end.
Thank you for the information. My question is to the gentleman that says that the Hajj experience has kind of like divided him from religion. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but I think I heard you say that you're moving away from religion. Was it that Hajj experience or a combination of whatever? Because speaking of your experience of getting out of the tower, I just thought, maybe I'm religious, that you were being guided to safety by some force other than your right shoe being too tight. And to hear you say after going around that I think I heard you say you were being more separated from your religious experience. Can you explain that?
I think I can, but first of all, I have to apologize. I hope you didn't mind my comment. I was yes. Okay. You have a point there. My wife likes to say there is a purpose in everything, but I would like to stand it on its ears and say everything can be made to have a purpose, or you can look upon something and find an opportunity. No, I do not believe that there was a divine hand which guided me out, because then I would have to subscribe to the idea that the same divine hand caused 2,900 and whatever number of deaths. So I have to tell you that. However, the silver linings that were there, and there were many, was that Americans in general began to realize that there are worlds beyond United States. There are people of cultures other than baseball and apple pie. So in a microcosmic way, I met some wonderful people. I was just telling Ms. Marshall there, I was praising her perhaps over profusely, and then I said, I know that you Occidentals feel very, very self-conscious about being praised too much. And even my youngest one, who was more American than any of us, he gets very, 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 very agitated when my wife praises him. She thinks he's Socrates and Apollo rolled in one, and he gets very upset. No, I honestly don't think that there was the divine guidance. I do feel that every religion, I mean, each individual who started the religion, just unbelievable individuals, but somehow the message got lost in translation over the centuries. I would say that.
Let me just add to it at the risk of, I hope it doesn't hurt anybody. I'm Jewish, celebrate Jewish holidays, children were bat mitzvahed and bar mitzvahed. And yet after 9/11, when I got home, I grabbed the Bible and I read some of it. I thought it would help me. It didn't make a really big difference. It really didn't. I thought, something's supposed to happen, I thought. I'll read the 23rd Psalm. And yet, I will tell you, I have in my whole life never been more choked up than when we walked into a memorial service a year later in Central Park, which was basically a gigantic concert, which drew on all the music and oratory of New Deal New York, of Franklin Roosevelt and Fiorello LaGuardia. And it opened with Fanfare for the Common Man, the radical composer Aaron Copland's composition, which was Fanfare for the Common Man long before it became the theme to CBS Wide World of Sports. And then we sang America the Beautiful, and the lines about alabaster cities, patriot dreams, more than self their country loved. I mean, at that point, and that was a very civic moment to me, and not a religious moment, I just fell apart. I mean, I just started crying, and I could barely keep singing. Because to me, these were the things that had sustained me. And what I thought was great about the way they had sustained me and their tremendous potential was that they didn't demand that you belong to one religion or another. They didn't demand you belong to one race or another. They didn't demand that you belong to one political party or another. They were a large enough civic umbrella that I would hope all sorts of people could gather under it in all their differences. And that memorial service, far more than any one religious service, ethnic service, survivor, non-survivor service, anything like that, to me was tremendously moving. That large open space in the middle of Central Park holding so many different people, I think was tremendously helpful to me, far more than any religious experience.
I would like to just take the mic for a second, just for a second. As soon as you mentioned you're being Jewish, I'll tell you a little anecdote, which is, I
and
just
the
have
story
to say,
goes on.
Okay, right. I work in the Port Authority, but it's a niche program which has nothing to do with aviation, airplanes, or terminals or bridges, but it does. The program provides financial aid to schools which are affected by the flight of aircraft. And what we do then is do noise abatement. And I basically direct that program now. I wouldn't use the word direct, but I'm a bit player in that. One of the things that I love about my job is contrary to many other jobs, when you do something, especially there are certain schools which have nothing. I mean, the schools are poor. Their library serves as a lunchroom and as an auditorium. There are many schools which are quite impoverished. On a couple of schools, I came to make the acquaintanceship of two very wonderful women. These were both schools, and I will not take the names of either the organization or them, but it's a Roman Catholic organization. The schools are poor. And my counterpart at the Federal Aviation Administration, who provides bulk of the aid, the Port Authority does provides 20% mainly, and we do the administration. So I was sort of joking to her. I said, look, this is one of the fewest programs in the world in which a Muslim and a Jew conspire to help a Roman Catholic.
Oh, wonderful. I think we have to start to close. I want to give you a little passage, like a poem, that has inspired me throughout this long process of collecting stories, archiving them, translating them, transcribing them, is a part of Jeffrey Hartman's Scars of the Spirit. Oral tradition, however monumental its aspiration, remains the art of assemblage, to reconstruct this shipwreck of fragments, these echoes, these shards of a huge tribal vocabulary, these partially remembered customs, needs a special love. Quote, nothing can be soul or whole that has not been rent, Yeats' Crazy Jane tells the bishop. Quote, break a vase, says Walcott, and the love that resembles the fragments is stronger than the love that took its symmetry for granted when it was whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know a guy named Frank Carville at all? He was a paralegal.